You don't need tanks to conquer a country anymore. You don't even need soldiers. Sometimes all it takes is a spreadsheet, a loan agreement, and time. Debt is supposed to be boring. But that idea only works if debt plays fair. And it doesn't. Right now, debt is everywhere. Governments, companies, households, students, nations. We're told this is normal, necessary, even healthy. Yet somehow, the more debt there is, the less power most people seem to have. That's not an accident. This story matters now because we at a moment where debt isn't just shaping economies, it is shaping behavior. What governments can do, what companies are allowed to do, what individuals dare to imagine for their future. And once debt crosses a certain line, it stops being a tool and starts acting like a weapon. Let's talk about how that happens. At its simplest, debt is just borrowing from the future. You take money today, you promise to give back more tomorrow. Used carefully, it's incredibly useful. It lets businesses grow faster. It lets governments build infrastructure. It lets families buy homes instead of waiting 40 years. But debt always comes with conditions: interest, timelines, penalties, rules. And those rules matter more than the debt itself, because debt doesn't just move money, it moves leverage. Imagine two people. One owes nothing. The other owes everything. Only one of them is truly free to say no. That's the quiet power of debt. It narrows choices long before it ever demands payment. Now scale that up. Countries borrow from other countries. Development, stability, growth. But debt is patient. And interest is relentless. Over time, repayment becomes harder. Budgets tighten, options shrink, and eventually the conversation changes. It's no longer, how do we grow? It becomes, what are you willing to give up? This is where debt stops being financial and becomes political. Because lenders don't just want their money back. They want certainty. Certainty that policies won't change, that priorities won't shift, that power stays predictable. So conditions appear: cut spending, privatize assets, open markets, freeze wages, raise taxes, usually on people who can't leave. None of this looks like force. There are no invasions, no headlines screaming conquest. It's all voluntary. But when the alternative is default collapse, capital flight, isolation, the choice isn't really a choice. This is the uncomfortable math most people never see. Debt compounds. Power concentrates. The more someone owes, the more valuable their compliance becomes. And this isn't limited to countries. Look at households. Mortgage debt shapes where people live. Credit card debt shapes what risks people can't afford to take. Debt doesn't just take money, it takes optionality. And when millions of people lose optionality at the same time, the entire economy bends. Now here's where it gets strange. We're told debt fuels growth. And in the short term, it does. When debt levels get high enough, the goal quietly changes from creating value to servicing obligations. Companies stop innovating and start optimizing. Governments stop planning decades ahead and start managing quarterly bond markets. Growth becomes secondary, stability becomes everything. And stability, in this context, means keeping creditors calm. This is why austerity often shows up right after debt crises. Not because it helps people, but because it reassures lenders. Publicly, the story is responsibility, tightening belts, hard choices. Privately, it's about maintaining access to future credit. Because once a borrower is labeled unreliable, the punishment isn't just higher interest, it's exclusion. And exclusion is devastating in a system built on continuous borrowing. This is the irony. The global economy runs on debt, but the system punishes anyone who admits they can't handle it. So everyone keeps borrowing, rolling over obligations, extending timelines, kicking risk forward. Until suddenly, it's not forward anymore. It's here. And when that moment arrives, debt reveals its true function. It becomes a lever that decides which hospitals get funded, which pensions survive, which industries are allowed to exist, and crucially, who absorbs the pain. Because debt crises are never evenly distributed. Creditors are protected first, institutions second. Everyone else negotiates with reality. This is why financial crises so often increase inequality. Not because markets hate fairness, but because the rules of debt repayment prioritize capital over labor. Always have. Now zoom out even further. At the global level, debt shapes geopolitics. Countries with reserve currencies can borrow cheaply, endlessly, and in their own money. Countries without them can't. That difference alone determines who gets policy freedom and who gets supervision. Some nations can run massive deficits without consequences. Others face immediate pressure for much smaller ones. Same system, very different rules. Debt here isn't neutral. It reinforces hierarchy. And the longer the system runs, the harder it is to escape your position within it. This is why debt forgiveness is so controversial. Not because it's impossible, but because it threatens precedent. If debt can be erased, then debt loses its power as a disciplinary tool, and that makes lenders nervous. So instead, debt's restructured, extended, renamed, the numbers stay large. The leverage stays intact, and the story repeats. What's sold to the public as fiscal prudence is often just debt maintenance. What's framed as reform is often compliance. And the most dangerous part? Most of this happens quietly. There's no villain monologue, no single mastermind. Just incentives doing what incentives do. Debt rewards predictability. It punishes deviation. And over time, it reshapes behavior to fit its needs. That's how a tool becomes a weapon. Not through malice, but through structure. So where does this leave us? And power belongs to those who can wait the longest for their money. That's a fragile system, because it assumes growth will always outpace obligations, that tomorrow will always be bigger than today, and history suggests that's not guaranteed. The unresolved question isn't whether debt will keep expanding. It's what happens when the people who owe the most finally decide they have nothing left to lose. If you found this thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the systems that shape our world. Thanks for watching.